Hello and welcome back to the Wolf's Den. We are the Order of the Green Hand, here to bring some clarity to A Song of Ice and Fire.
As many of you already know, our skepticism of the R+L=J theory began while reading A Storm of Swords, where Ned and Ashara's romance is brought to life in the telling of the Night of the Laughing Tree story, and in Ned Dane's conversation with Arya. We officially became non-believers when we got into A Dance with Dragons, where Dany thinks about how she might have been closer in age to Rhaegar's son, Aegon, and how she might have married him instead of Viserys, which is something she had never thought about before. We also learn about the Wolf's Den, Ned and the Fisherman's Daughter, see Jon pull his baby swap, and how Maester Aemon once told his brother Aegon that in order to be king, he has to, quote, kill the boy and let the man be born. Coming up, we will be discussing another enlightening plotline from A Dance with Dragons, specifically Tyrion's journey from Pentos to Volantis, and how discovering the true identities of his companions aboard the Shy Maid could be the key to unlocking the mystery of who was actually born at the Tower of Joy. So, let's do this.
To sort of set the stage, Tyrion's point of view chapters begin with him traveling to Essos after killing his father and being smuggled out of King's Landing by Varys. He arrives at Illyrio Malpais' manse in Pentos. He seems to be suffering from some sort of PTSD and is attempting to drown his sorrows in wine, and basically, for all intents and purposes, is making an absolute mess of himself. Illyrio decides that he is in need of some tough love, and basically gives him two options: help or kill yourself. But he sweetened the pot by offering him a chance to see living dragons, which is something that he has both literally and figuratively dreamed about since he was a boy. Tyrion decided that he wanted to live, so Illyrio brings him to meet up with some friends of his who are heading south and are planning to meet up with Dany in Volantis.
Among them are an older man going by the name Griff, his son, young Griff, a guy who calls himself Half-Maester Haldon, a septa named Lemore, a sellsword named Raleigh Duckfield, who goes by Duck, and a Roynish couple, Ysilla and Yandri, who own the boat they'll be traveling on, which is called the Shy Maid. As time goes by, Tyrion begins to realize that pretty much no one on the Shy Maid is who they say they are, which actually includes him, as he's going by either Yolo or Hugor, seemingly dependent on his mood. The only people on the boat whose identities he's confident are true are Ysilla, Yandri, and Duck. Tyrion being Tyrion, it doesn't take him long to begin unraveling the truths about his companions and the secret binding them together. Tyrion becomes suspicious when he notices that everyone he's traveling with seems to have a specific role or purpose to serve for young Griff. Half-Maester Haldon is there to serve as any maester would, and teach young Griff about history, arithmetic, languages, etc. Septa Lemore is there to instruct him in the mysteries of the faith, and Duck trains him at arms. It strikes Tyrion as odd that all of these people would be working so hard to cultivate, train, and instruct some sellsword's whelp. This leads him to begin wondering who young Griff actually is. To pass time, he learns to play Cyvasse, which is a chess-like strategy game that is played particularly in Essos and even some in Dorne. Initially, Haldon cleans the floor with Tyrion, but again, Tyrion being Tyrion, he learns quickly, and since he has yet to figure out what the hell is going on this little boat, he challenges Haldon to a game with stakes. Neither of them have any coin to wager, so they play for secrets. A few hours later, Haldon emerges back on deck looking totally dejected. Shortly thereafter, Tyrion confronts young Griff on his true identity, and it turns out he is Aegon Targaryen, who was presumed dead following the sack of King's Landing.
This is where the story gets a little hairy. According to the story that Aegon was told, it wasn't him who died there, but an infant that Varys bought for a cask of Arbor gold in Flea Bottom. Now, there are many reasons that people are so distrustful of this Aegon, but the issue that has to be at the top of the list is how hard to believe his story is. To start, if Aegon was the son of Elia Martell, don't you think that Doran Martell would have been brought into this? I mean, he's allegedly this boy's uncle, and is widely known to be a very measured, calculated man who is more than capable of discretion. But he's not a part of this. Additionally, when the city was sacked, it is said that Elia fought like only a mother would to save her son. So, if it wasn't really her son, why isn't it said that she fought like only a mother would to save her daughter? That would be believable. But the idea that Varys switched out her son, and she died defending a random baby when her actual daughter was there, is not believable. Also, what mother would agree to a plan that protects the life of one of her children, but not the other? Even if he was the prince that was promised, it just doesn't make sense. What would make sense is that Elia, baby Aegon, and Rhaenys all died in King's Landing, as reported, and that this Aegon is the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna. But why would they lie about which of Rhaegar's sons he is? Well, we believe that they lied because they needed Jon Connington's help, and there is absolutely no evidence that Rhaegar and Lyanna had a child, so rather than risking him saying no on the grounds that he doesn't believe that it's actually Rhaegar's son, they lied and told him that he was his older brother, and had Ashara Dane, who was one of Elia's handmaidens, deliver the child to him, which would further reinforce the idea in Connington's head.
We also noticed another interesting parallel between this Aegon and another character many of us are quite familiar with. As Tyrion approaches the Shy Maid, he sees a boy with blue hair holding a wide-brimmed straw hat, who we soon find out is young Griff, or Aegon. It took me a few reads to notice this, but there are only 2 characters in all of George R.R. Martin's books, which take place in the world of Ice and Fire, who have or wear a wide-brimmed straw hat. Obviously, young Griff or Aegon is one. The other is Aegon V Targaryen, better known as Egg from the Dunk and Egg stories. Aegon, or Egg, brother to Maester Aemon, was born the 4th son of a 4th son, to Lady Diana Dane of Starfall and Maekar Targaryen. The Dunk and Egg trilogy chronicles some of the early years of Aegon V Targaryen's life, as he travels with a hedge knight named Sir Duncan the Tall, who goes by Dunk. So, while Egg had a dunk, this Aegon has a duck, who has a similar backstory and persona as Dunk, and is even referred to as a hedge knight once by Tyrion.
Anyways, upon meeting young Griff, one of the very first things that Tyrion does is make careful note of his appearance. A Dance of Dragons takes place in the year 300 AC. Tyrion thinks that Aegon appears to be about 15 or 16 years old. Given the description of Aegon and the number of times that it is alluded to that he's still growing, I think it's safe to assume that Tyrion's assessment is accurate. So, if young Griff is about 15 or 16 years old in the year 300, that would mean that he was born in the year 284, which perfectly lines up with the timeline that we believe is true. Our timeline is further supported by a statement that Jon Connington made in his point of view chapter later in the book, where he thinks, 17 years had come and gone since the Battle of the Bells, yet the sound of bells ringing still tied a knot in his guts. The Battle of the Bells took place right around the same time that the Siege of Storm's End began, which is known to have lasted about a year. This means that both the war and the siege ended in the year 284 AC. Afterwards, Ned went in search of his sister. This means that the child born to Lyanna in 284 would be about 15 or 16 years old in the year 300. The Aegon born to Elia on Dragonstone in 281 would be 18 turning 19 in the year 300. And there is a very large physical difference between a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old boy. So it is very unlikely that he could have misjudged the situation by that much.
Tyrion tells Aegon that in Westeros, his blue hair will get him nothing but rocks thrown at him and laughs from the maidens. Young Griff tells him he dyes his hair blue in honor of his dead Tyroshi mother, which is worth noting, as there is only one woman in the story who is closely associated with the color blue, and that's Lyanna. Anyways, though Tyrion is kind of rude to young Griff at first, similar to the way he acted when he first met Jon, he then thinks to himself,
"This beardless boy could have any maiden in the Seven Kingdoms, blue hair or no. Those eyes would melt them." Like his sire, young Griff had blue eyes, but where his father's eyes were pale, the son's were dark. By lamplight, they turned black, and in the light of dusk, they seemed purple. His eyelashes were as long as any woman's.
Another Westerosi stud, known for being really, really ridiculously good-looking, was Rhaegar. So good-looking that even self-absorbed Cersei Lannister disentangled herself from her derangement for long enough to recall how beautiful she had thought Rhaegar was.
So, young Griff/Aegon is the right age to be Rhaegar and Lyanna's son, and seems to have inherited his father's good looks. He's also described as, or observed to be, a good kid, a fast learner, and skilled at arms. When Illyrio first tells Tyrion about young Griff, he states, "There never was a nobler lad." Tyrion sits in on lessons with Griff, and notes that while he seems to prefer training at arms, he is clearly very smart. Despite being a quick study, young Griff enjoys his lessons with Duck the most, and as depicted here, he is quite good with a sword. Young Griff landed more blows, though Duck's were harder. After a while, the bigger man began to tire. His cuts came a little slower, a little lower. Young Griff turned them all and launched a furious attack that forced Sir Raleigh back. When they reached the stern, the lad tied up their blades and slammed a shoulder into Duck, and the big man went into the river. So, just like Rhaegar, Aegon is good at absolutely everything he does. But while Rhaegar preferred books to swords, Aegon prefers swords to books, which seems to indicate that he inherited a bit of Lyanna in his personality.
As the Shy Maid continues its journey down the Rhoyne River, the mood becomes a little tense as they enter the Sorrows, a place known to be inhabited by stone men. Aegon is told to get below deck with Lemore, as they are sworn to protect him. He refuses, stating that he's as good as Duck with a sword, and he points out that Tyrion is a dwarf, and even he's staying on deck. To which Tyrion responds,
"My secret is revealed. I'm less than half of Halden, and no one gives a mummer's fart whether I live or die. Least of all me," he thought. "You, though, you are everything." Then, after a few back and forths, Aegon turns to Jon Connington and says, "He knows who I am." To which Tyrion replied, "The blue hair makes your eyes seem blue. That's good. And the tale of how you color it in honor of your dead Tyroshi mother was so touching it almost made me cry. Still, a curious man might wonder why some sellsword's whelp would need a soiled septa to instruct him in the faith, or a chainless maester to tutor him in history and tongues. And a clever man might question why your father would engage a hedge knight to train you in arms, instead of simply sending you off to apprentice with one of the free companies. It is almost as if someone wanted to keep you hidden while still preparing you for... what? Now there's a puzzlement. But I'm sure that in time it will come to me. I must admit, you have noble features for a dead boy."
As their bantering continues, the boat is attacked by stone men. Tyrion aids in protecting the now revealed prince, and in the process is dragged into the water by one of the stone men. A few days later, Tyrion awakens to find that it was Griff who had saved him from drowning, and that it was Aegon who had then forbade the crew from throwing him back into the water. Shortly after learning about how Aegon had saved him from a life as a stone man, Aegon and Lemore emerge on deck. Tyrion sees that Aegon is in an agitated mood, as he was not allowed to go ashore with the others, and thinks,
"The perfect prince, but still half a boy for all that, with little and less experience of the world and all its woes."
He challenges him to a game of Cyvasse, and regales him with some of the wits and wisdom of Tyrion Lannister, and in the process begins killing the boy so the man can be born. As Aegon arrays his pieces at the start of the game, Tyrion thinks,
"A young man's formation, as bold as it is foolish. He risks all for the quick kill." And then he tells him, "I would not do that if I were you. It is a mistake to bring your dragon out too soon. Your father knew the dangers of being overbold."
As their game continues, Tyrion tells Aegon that he should not show up to his aunt a beggar, as she seems to be a proud, strong woman who has an army of her own, not to mention dragons. He also points out that Aegon's claim to the throne is stronger than hers, which could be an additional fly in the ointment. Aegon replies that he trusts Connington to win her over to their cause, to which Tyrion replies,
"Trust no one, my prince. Not your chainless maester, not your false father, not the gallant duck, nor the lovely Lemore, nor these other fine friends who grew you from a bean. Above all, trust not the cheesemonger, nor the spider, nor this little dragon queen you mean to marry. All that mistrust will sour your stomach and keep you awake by night, 'tis true. But better that than the long sleep that does not end. But what do I know? Your father is a great lord, and I am just a twisted little monkey man. Still, I'd do things differently."
Tyrion ends up winning the match, which turns out is a direct result of Aegon listening to his advice at the start of the game. Aegon stares in astonishment at the Cyvasse board, and questions Tyrion about what he had said. Tyrion replies,
"I lied. Trust no one, and keep your dragon close."
Furious, Aegon kicks over the Cyvasse board and demands Tyrion clean it up. As he abides the prince's order, he thinks,
"He may well be a Targaryen after all."
Aegon later reflects on the advice Tyrion gave him. As he and Jon Connington approach the Golden Company, he says, "I like the sound of that. My army." A smile flashed across his face, then vanished. Are they, though? They're sellswords. Yolo warned me to trust no one.
"There is wisdom in that," Griff admitted. "Not every man is what he seems, and a prince especially has good cause to be wary. But go too far down that road, and the mistrust can poison you, make you sour and fearful. You would do best to walk a middle course. Let men earn your trust with leal service, but when they do, be generous and open-handed."
The boy nodded. "I will remember." By the time Connington and Aegon meet with the captains of the Golden Company, he quickly realizes that the men have become disillusioned and are on the brink of abandoning his cause altogether. Connington fails to rally the men, at which point Aegon takes matters into his own hands and rises to the occasion and says,
"Then put your hopes on me. Daenerys is Prince Rhaegar's sister, but I am Rhaegar's son. I am the only dragon you need. If my aunt wants Meereen, she's welcome to it. I will claim the Iron Throne by myself, with your swords and your allegiance. Move fast and strike hard, and we can win some easy victories before the Lannisters even know that we have landed. That will bring others to our cause." When all of them began to speak at once, Griff knew the tide had turned. This was a side of Aegon he'd never seen before. It was not the prudent course, but he was tired of prudence, sick of secrets, weary of waiting. Win or lose, he would see Griffin's Roost again before he died, and be buried in a tomb beside his father's. One by one, the men of the Golden Company rose, knelt, and laid their swords at the feet of his young prince.
With the 10,000 men of the Golden Company sworn to his cause, Aegon does just what he said he would. He goes west instead of east, lands at Cape Wrath, and takes Griffin's Roost, John Connington's ancestral home. After settling in, Connington tells some of the captains that it is time he sent for Aegon, as he would be safer behind the castle walls, rather than at camp with the men. Franklin Flowers tells him that Aegon won't much like that, as he seems to prefer being in the thick of things. A few days later, Aegon arrives, and Connington orders one of the men to escort him to his solar at once. To his dismay, he realizes that the boy Griff he had known in Essos was now a man not so eager to follow his orders. As he awaits Aegon's arrival, he thinks,
Prince Aegon Targaryen was not near as biddable as the boy young Griff had been. The better part of an hour passed before he finally turned up in the solar, with Duck at his side.
When Aegon arrives, he says, Lord Connington, I like your castle. This seems like an innocuous statement that anyone might say when seeing someone's home for the first time. But something about the way Aegon said it makes Connington flash back 20 years to the time he stood with Rhaegar on the battlements of Griffin's Roost, and how Rhaegar said, "Your father's lands are beautiful." In other words, both Rhaegar and Aegon said and did virtually the exact same thing. When Connington tries to dismiss Duck from the solar, Aegon insists he stay, which reminds Jon on just how resolute Aegon had been about Duck being a member of his Kingsguard.
He had tried his best to dissuade the prince from giving Duckfield that cloak, pointing out that the honor might best be held in reserve for warriors of greater renown whose fealty would add luster to their cause, and the younger sons of great lords whose support they would need in the coming struggle. But the boy would not be moved. Duck will die for me, if need be, he had said, and that is all I require in my Kingsguard.
Prince Aegon then asks Connington about his plan to attack Storm's End. Jon asks him if Harry Strickland, the Captain General of the Golden Company, had asked him to delay it, to which Aegon replies, "He did, actually, but I won't. You have the right of it, my lord. I want the attack to go ahead, with one change. I mean to lead it." So, let's quickly review all that we have learned about Aegon, also known as Young Griff. 1. He and everyone else of substance aboard the Shy Maid are presumed dead. 2. He's the real deal, but not the son of Elia and Rhaegar, but the son of Lyanna and Rhaegar. 3. He looks the part, not only because he has Targaryen features, but because he's described by Tyrion as being ridiculously good-looking, similar to the way that Cersei remembers Rhaegar as being the most beautiful man she had ever seen. 4. He is good at everything he does, just like Rhaegar. 5. His story very much parallels the tale of Egg from the Dunk and Egg stories. Both of them grow up concealing their true identities from the world around them. Both wear straw hats. Both are good kids. Both of them befriend a hedge knight whom they later appoint to their Kingsguard and spend most of their formative years living amongst the common people. Additionally, Egg's mother was a Dane, and Septa Lemore, the woman who has been the closest thing Aegon has to a mother, is very likely a Shara Dane. However, there is one distinction between the two. When Maester Aemon tells Jon about his brother Aegon, he indicated that Egg had an innocence to him that persisted well into adulthood, whereas Aegon, the sixth of his name, quickly evolves into the man he needs to be. When George R.R. Martin was asked for his thoughts on Aegon, he replied, "I have plenty of thoughts about Aegon. So, before we end, we thought it would be fitting to conclude with George R.R. Martin's last thoughts about Aegon that he has shared with us, which can be found in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons. As Kevin Lannister lays dying after being shot by Varys, Varys explains to him why he had to meet such a tragic end, and perfectly articulates all that needs to be said about Aegon. So, here it is.
Aegon has been shaped for rule since before he could walk. He has been trained in arms as befits a knight to be, but that was not the end of his education. He reads and writes. He speaks several tongues. He has studied history and law and poetry. A septa has instructed him in the mysteries of the faith since he was old enough to understand them. He has lived with fisher folk, worked with his hands, swum in rivers and mended nets, and learned to wash his own clothes at need. He can fish and cook and bind up a wound. He knows what it is like to be hungry, to be hunted, to be afraid. Tommen has been taught that kingship is a right. Aegon knows that kingship is his duty, and that a king must put his people first, and live and rule for them.